Rotus Odiri. Everyone, Olalere participants.
Eti, please mute your mic.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen from around the world. We thank you so much for being a part of this what promises to be a very engaging and informative webinar from the good folks at Mustard Insights. They're also going to be revealing an app, PriceWiz, I believe. We're going to check out a demo from that app. But as you can see, this is going to be about the petroleum industry in Africa's largest economy. What used to be Africa's largest oil producer went to number 2, and now I think we're back at number 1. I'm Rotus Odiri, host of the Global Business Report on Arise TV, where we talk extensively about the petroleum industry, as well as all the other sectors in Nigeria's economy. I am very, very excited to be part of this discussion. We're going to be getting a keynote address from our former Minister of State of Petroleum Industry, of the petroleum sector, Mr. Professor Emmanuel Ibe Kachikwu. Very much looking forward to that. And as you can see, we've got a very diverse panel that is going to be taking us through a number of discussions with respect to this industry, which is petroleum. Again, understanding the petroleum value chain in Nigeria, the road ahead. So there is, of course, a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen for all our participants that are out there. So you can ask questions. It's going to be very, very engaging. We're going to be discussing a number. I mean, I don't even know if 2 hours is enough, frankly, because there's all sorts of news, even as early as recent as yesterday, breaking in the petroleum sector, from things that are happening globally to domestically here in Nigeria. So again, very happy to be part of this panel. Very happy that we have Professor Emmanuel Ibe Kachikwu with us to give us his keynote address, where he's going to be going through a number. I mean, who better than him to headline this forum? So I'm proud to be here. I believe we've got our panelists that are with us, as we're going to be discussing a lot in the petroleum sector, but we also want you to be a part of this. Shout out to Mustard Insights. Looking forward to their PriceWiz app, which they're going to be demoing later on. And I'm about to yield the floor to Professor Emmanuel Ibe Kachikwu, former Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, former President of OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, former President of APPO, which is the African Petroleum Producers Organization. He's the former President of the GECF, which is the Gas Exporting Countries Forum. He's also the Chairman of the African Energy and Infrastructure Limited. And dare I say it, the most fashionable minister we ever had. I mean, we always look forward to seeing him whenever he came for press conferences, around when he was talking to the media. So I'm glad that he's a part of this. It's an honor to have you, sir. So I'm going to yield the floor to Professor Emmanuel Ibe Kachikwu as he takes us through his keynote address. Good morning to you, sir. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. And for the participants, I think welcome to what should be a very engaging session. I'm far away in South Africa, where we're having the Africa Oil Week and transitioning to the Africa Energy Week. So I'm addressing you from there. But I probably won't be in for the entire gamut of the presentations you're going to have. But the whole idea is for me to lay some groundwork to enable you have your conversation. I think this is an idea that whose time has come. The discussion point that you have, which is understanding the value chain for this sector in Nigeria and what road we have ahead, is very, very topical today for very many reasons. So much is happening around the world, so much is happening internally in Nigeria, and part of the challenges we would have is to, as a nation, basically sit back and say, what exactly is our objective road track? Let me start first by, and I will leave you with a whole lot of questions, which I'm sure the panel, very ably constituted, will be able to dissect, find solution, and be able to add value to this seminar. Let's start from the global criticality. What are the things influencing oil and gas production in the world today? The reality is that as you go from things like production, the data is very, very clear. Oil production, as we know it, is stabilized to degenerating. It's certainly not in the upswing. You're having new discoveries, but those are just to make up basically depleted reserves. The energy around continuing to produce oil is beginning to diminish, only pumped up by the very existential factors like the Ukraine war, the new Israeli Hamas issue that is going on, which is also affecting that. And so countries are beginning to respond to some of these exigencies. But otherwise, oil production, as it were, was actually, quite frankly, plateauing. Gas, obviously, as a transition energy, is getting a lot of offspring and investments all over the world. And over the next 10 years, that will be so. So countries that have the privilege like us, or the blessing to have gas, must begin to look at it very, very critically and be able to find the funding to expand those horizons. Why the funding is still there, because ultimately the transition in the world is getting even out of oil and out of gas. And then you will find a whole lot of national swings and global geographic swings dictated by existential issues. What you tend to have, if you look at what is happening in Ukraine, you look at what is happening in Israel today, you look at what the global factors in terms of climate change have been, the very many national, geographical and climatic disasters we had in 2023, and how countries have responded and how they have interpreted the dynamics of those. What it says to you is that there is growing the notion of core national interest protection, and obviously what I call pendulum survival shifts. So if you look at Europe, that have basically exited, was a champion of the whole global change in terms of the oil dynamics. They've gone back again to the existential coal and nuclear, all because of the Ukraine factors that created the bubble in that area. The effects of the Arab, basically the Israeli Hamas fight too, will impact on those. The effect of Russia's quote and unquote belligerence towards the Western domination will also affect that. So countries have made some swing back to initial very dramatic positions that they have on this. In all of this, Africa has remained stable, other than our own miniature internal local conflicts, which have not been at global levels, we've been relatively stable. But how do we take advantage of those? Oil prices will always be determined by international factors and existential investment outlook. For countries like Nigeria to do well in this kind of environment, must be able to develop very stable, predictable policies that take cognizance of international dynamics and be able to drive favorable investment climate. And that is the reach from the global scene. If you look at the Nigerian dominant issues, the issues around production, the past versus the present versus the future. The past was very good, largely 2.1, highest point, 2.2 million barrels a day production. Today, about 1.1, 1.2 by last month's count. And then where is the future? We've lost our dominant position in terms of being the largest oil producer, but hopefully that is temporary and we should be able to swing that back in because the facilities are there, the reserves are there. What is required are pursuing very aggressive investment policies. So on production, it's basically it's a plateau swing, hopefully an upward swing up the hill in the next couple of years. On refining, we've gone from very good to extremely non-existent and with a lot of hope into the future. But refining is going to be a very key element of our survival in this industry for two reasons. One, that once there's a transition away from traditional oil fossils, then we would need to be able to consume that locally and refine that to a portion where the carbon contents are very low and be able to critically compete in the global space. So African refined product market is our first forte. To do that, we've got to get up our refining capacity. The Dangote refinery, the modular refineries are coming up, and absolutely the 450,000 global capacity NMPC refineries must come on stream however we do it. Investment is another issue for us. We are having declining investments. We're not getting a good read when major players are beginning to hand over all the onshore facilities. Much as it creates opportunities for a local entrepreneurial play, the reality is that the amount of money required to, quite frankly, get these facilities up and running and improve on them, are not available locally. And I doubt very much that our local investors, other than maintaining status quo, and obviously making investors relatively rich, which is not necessarily a bad thing, have the facilities and the funds that they need to be able to repair these facilities, increase their production, find new fields in those areas. This sort of aggressive play that you need to get us, in my opinion, from the 2 million traditional production plant to the 3.5, potentially 4 million barrels per day potential plant is not available locally. It's going to depend on the world big 7 players. And if they're beginning to exit, it's not good music. Transition energy is very key. Although we have all sang in Africa with fairly discordant but understandable tones in terms of just transition, making sure that we first look at our own, which makes sense. But I'm not seeing a very aggressive play similar to the Arabs in terms of this field. What are we doing? How are we positioning ourselves to be able to fund the transition movement? Because ultimately, we're going to be lagging behind the world and we're not going to have a lot of financial investments from the world. So we need to be able to fund our resources, our natural resource play. And the only people who are doing that very aggressively are the UAEs, the Saudi Arabias, the Qatars, and the rest. And we need to borrow relief from that. Now, what's going to be our existential energy mix for our development? Ultimately, in the next 10 years, what do we see play? Right now, it is oil and gas, but where does water come in? Hydro. Where does wind come in? Where does, hopefully, solar come in? How much of that can we use to reduce the dependence that we have currently on our energy mixes? I think the final thing that I look at is as I look at this over the last 20, 30 years, it begins to occur to me that we really have not sat down as a nation to say, what exactly is the objective of this sector? All I hear is how to ensure that our production is okay, so we make money and we don't lose money and we have enough to share within the FAC. But that can't be the existential objective policy of this sector. So we need to sit down and say, what is the policy? Is our policy trust largely is it citizenship welfare? Are we trying to ensure that this industry helps us generate enough money to build infrastructure, create finance for new entrepreneurial skills, and be able to invest in very dominant emerging sectors that are not necessarily linked to petroleum? Is it citizen welfare? Is it just an issue of income and resource opportunities? How do we ensure that we continue to feed the elephant in the room? Which is make more money, distribute it within the states, and then the governors and the federal government spend it, and then we leave it at that. Is that what the issue is? Is it how to build energy self-sufficiency ultimately? Are we going to use this as a dominant and predictive investment environment to be able to look at our energy policy? How do we get everybody in this country lined up to electricity to increase production? How does this sector help us do that? Is it that we're going to become a predictive investment hub where everybody who wants to invest in the oil sector sees us first as a place to go to, which is not what is happening now. They're actually seeing us as about the 7th or 8th investment point. So something clearly is wrong, and PIA doesn't seem to be solving that very quickly. Are we going to ring fence the African continent as a market, a futuristic market, and be able to hold sway there so that at the end of the day, anybody who wants to get into this play needs to either do it through Nigeria or talk to Nigeria? So we have to find a policy trust that we're pursuing, as opposed to just producing oil for the sake of producing oil. Because if we don't, what will happen is that once the transition roadmap gets away from where we are lost with nothing left, and we've had no policy laid out that we're going to continue to pursue. So there are so many challenging things. PIA emergence has helped, took 20 years to do, wasn't very helpful because we lost a lot of investment in those 20 years. But I'm not even sure that going forward, what I see in the play in terms of actual execution of PIA is also going to get us where we intended PIA to get us, in terms of how it's executed, how we're transiting to the emerging PIA environment, how that is encouraging people who want to come into this. Okay, there's not a stable environment. We can predict government decisions, and to that extent, we can put our investment here. A lot needs to happen. PIA is not just a sectoral redistribution of positions within the industry. It's got to be an affirmation of what government policies will be, what our directional roadmap will be, what the opportunity matrices will be. And I'm not seeing that yet defined and yet in play. And those are some of the things that hopefully my upcoming book I'll be able to point out to in terms of what the missing links are in PIA. So a lot to talk about. Certainly a lot of opportunities out in the field of play here. A lot of countries, a lot of investment countries are looking at us. And one critical thing I need to point out, if you look at the market matrix, so who are those actually buying your oil? And then you look at the very first 10. It's between the key emerging countries. Basically, you look at Asia. You look at you look at Asia. I'm not going to most oil. Who are actually buying your oil? You look at the likes of Asia. You look at the first 10 countries. Yes, that basically are your energy consuming countries: China, United States, India, Russia, Japan, Brazil, and in that order, and South Korea. Now, why is this important? This is where the market really is. And what do you need to do to attract attention from this market? Your crude is sweet and light, so to that extent, very little sale point. But ultimately, as they begin to shift away from this, you need to have developed sound relationships with this sort of countries to be able to get investments that you need into the emerging energy sector, especially gas expansion. Ultimately, we will get to a point over the next 10 years where we would have to take our oil and hopefully refine it sufficiently to take it out and be able to reach out to some of these markets with a different type of product mix. And that's going to be a challenge. I'm not seeing that reserve built up now. Everything still depends on first world investment. So a lot of investment issues, a lot of policy trust issues, a lot of PIA, post-PIA relationship issues. But more fundamentally for me, being able to balance the issue of production with the issue of the futuristic energy and setting the goalposts. Now, I go to Saudi Arabia and the Arab countries, and what I see is building of smart cities. What I see is reserve conservation for the future generation. What I see is expanding their development funds all over, and also beginning to create a mix in the development fund application, such that you're beginning to see them buy into the West, buy into investments in this sector, not depend on their traditional production, but be able to position themselves in such a way that they're able to see the funding or reach the funding that they need or create the funding that they need for what is going to become a very critical roadmap over the next 10 years as countries begin to shift away from traditional fossils into the emerging future. So with these few comments, I wish you guys a lot of luck in your conference, a lot of conversations, so much to discuss, but I'm sure that the panel that you put together is going to be in a position to deliberate on all this and find some immediate solutions for the challenges that we face today. Thank you very much.
Professor Emmanuel Ibe Kachikwu, former Minister of State, Petroleum Resources for Nigeria, we thank you so much for your time, sir, and laying the groundwork for us to discuss further. I wish we could have you stick around further for more questions, because I would love to pick your thoughts. But you mentioned the book. I'm looking forward to that book. Let us know when that book is coming out so that we can get copies of it and I hope to get, pick your brain more on a lot more issues on the petroleum sector. So we thank you so much for joining us live from South Africa for Energy Week, where all these matters are going to be discussed. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right. So what better way to kick us off with former Minister of State for Petroleum Resources there. Again, shout out to Mustard Insights for putting this webinar together. I'm looking forward to that demo for Price Ways. And shout out to Loretta, the brains behind this operation here. She's been working really hard in putting everything together. So I think we're getting Loretta Egba. We'll be hearing from her very soon. All right, so let me introduce our panelists, because there's a whole lot to get into. I was jotting down notes. Again, for our participants, the Q&A box there, you can of course add your questions, and we'll be happy to answer them. So we've got a great list of folks here that are going to be sharing their thoughts on what we've just heard. So we've got Dr. Tolu Awoyinfa, who is an oil and gas finance executive. We have engineer Olalere Odusote, who is a former commissioner of energy for Lagos State. We've got Ronke Onadeko, principal consultant, DRNL Consulting Ltd. We've also got Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, director at Basumoh Nigeria Ltd. So we've got a full panel here, and there's a lot to discuss. So I think we should start with upstream, what's happening in the, how oil prices are moving and how, how Nigeria could benefit. But I know where, there's a double-edged sword or two sides to the coin there. So I guess looking at what Professor Kachikwu just spoke about, Dr. Awoyinfa, let me start with you. And the geopolitical issues that we're seeing around the world. You mentioned it's Russia, Ukraine, then also the Middle East matters. Oil prices have been climbing. Do you see more turmoil in the future, and should Nigeria be benefiting from what we're seeing? Because we haven't quite benefited from these higher oil prices. So I wanted to get your thoughts. I guess let's pick everybody's brain on the geopolitical situation, oil prices. And as far as our petroleum sector is concerned, it would be Nigeria's cash cow. Should we be benefiting more? Dr. Awoyinfa, you can kick off.
Thank you, Rotus, and I'm glad to be on. I mean, I think we've had a very good introduction by Professor Kachikwu. I was, just a lot of what he was discussing really resonated with some of the thoughts I've had. And just responding to your point directly, I mean, obviously, we've had the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has been sustained for a couple of years now. And at the moment, most recently, we've had the recent Israel-Gaza conflict as well. Thus far, we haven't been directly involved. And just speaking most recently to the recent events, we haven't seen a direct impact, and that's more tied to the fact that those entities are not, necessarily one of the larger oil producers. There was a bit of a spike in oil prices just on the back of the events. However, we haven't seen a greater impact. However, just to sound a note of caution, given the location of the conflict, we could potentially see a contagion effect spilling over into the other regions that are in close proximity to these conflicts, and that may have an impact on global oil production. And if we are to come down on what we expect to see, we could potentially see a disruption in production, which naturally would potentially lead to a spike in oil prices. Bringing it home, how does that benefit us? I mean, it would benefit us if we're able to bump up our production. I mean, I'm sure that's a whole full conversation in terms of maximizing the benefits of higher oil prices by boosting production. But I'll just stop here on that point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Awoyinfa. Thanks for that. Let me come to you, Ronke Onadeko at DRNL Consulting Ltd. There's still on the global front, Ronke, the U.S. administration is looking at sanctions on Iran because Iran has denied being part of the Hamas attack in Israel, but we've seen oil prices climb. They're also looking at more sanctions on Russia, but Russia and Iran, key oil producers. Russia is not part of OPEC, but still key oil producers. Ronke, should we be hoping for more conflict? Because the more this happens, there's this bad joke out there that Nigeria should be hoping for more conflict on the geopolitical scene because it pushes oil prices up. Should we be hoping for more conflict so that the oil prices can assist Nigeria? Or are you in line with what Dr. Awoyinfa just said, in that the only way we can benefit is ramping up production? What's your take on what we're seeing globally?
Okay, so my view on this is, the first thing is that Nigeria is in a very precarious situation. The more money we make from crude oil because prices are going up, the more money we spend on importation of petroleum products. So the net effect usually for us is almost no gain. When prices of crude oil go up, the prices of petroleum products, which are direct derivatives also go up. And because we're a net importer of petroleum products, it's quite difficult for us. So until we start seeing our local refining capacity built up, we don't have an upside for high crude prices. On the other hand, the issue of conflict, Russia, Ukraine has been on for 2 years. Yes, we saw a bit of a shift, but it soon settles because internationally, the people who actually make the rules play the rules. We heard people were going to stop buying Russian products, but then at some point in the process, we found out that the category for oil from Russia was if it had more than X% of Russian oil in the final mix. So everybody understood that they could get Russian oil up to a particular percent and blend it with oils from crude oil from other places to ensure that it was still in the market. So the conflict has also benefited Russia in a strange way. So we need to find our way in Nigeria and stop following this herd mentality where the West make rules, they know how to break the rules, and we get the back end of the stick. So until we become a dominant player in a particular area, we don't get to make the rules. So this is supposedly the decade for gas in Nigeria. I want to start seeing seriousness behind that declaration, seeing how we can begin to dominate the sector of natural gas so that when natural gas really does have a dominant role in the world and global economy, we begin to make the rules, we begin to play the rules, and we begin to get the gains. So that's really my take on the conflict. Conflict right now hasn't benefited us that much. So whether it gets escalated or de-escalated, it's a net position for Nigeria.
Ronke Onadeko, thank you so much for that. Okay, I understand that maybe my wish has been granted that Professor Ibe Kachikwu can stick around for maybe 1 or 2 questions. So I think because I thought he was heading out, but I guess in the background I was hoping you could stick around. So I think, Professor, if you are still with us, and hopefully you can see him on if he comes on, I did want to get his thoughts on this because it was part of his presentation as far as the geopolitical concerns are geopolitical issues are concerned. So hopefully we have him. Professor, if you're still there, you can turn on your video so we can, yes, he's there. Okay, fantastic. Okay, Professor, thank you so much, Professor Kachikwu, for sticking around. So yes, look, in line with that, what you talked about it, you touched on it as far as the geopolitical concerns, but Professor, should we want this to continue for oil prices to remain high? Do you think we can benefit? There's enough time for us to be able to turn the production issues around to benefit from these higher prices? What is your take? If you can dive a little bit deeper from your keynote on these geopolitical matters going on, Russia, Israel, so on.
No, I think I totally agree with you. I was just stepping back in when I overheard Ronke's commentary on this. And the reality is that's the truth. You can't plan your industry on the basis of crisis expectation and a crisis hope. You've got to plan it on the basis of long-term existentialism. These things come and go, and they have two-sided effects. If you benefit from the high prices, you also benefit from the high prices of petroleum refined products. We would need, first and foremost, to begin to pay attention to our refined sector and get us to a point where we are almost 100% non-dependent on imported products. Then you can begin to get the benefits of an upward swing in prices. And so until we do that, we do have a crisis to follow. Second is that the nature of geopolitical dynamics and place is that you never really know where the pendulum will shift. It may, in the first instance, give you an indication of upward swing in price. But in the reality, it is also affects investment. And the crisis, when there's a crisis, investors don't want to take away money from their host countries because they're unsure which way the world is going. And so part of the down effect of the negative effects we've seen with crises that have happened in Ukraine and the rest is that also money into the oil sector in Nigeria has dwindled substantially. And so whilst there's the price, potential price benefit there, you don't even have the investments to keep your reserves or keep your production up. So the question you ask is why we continue to slide downwards in terms of volumes, when in fact the thinkology would be that you just quite frankly, move on to a very high volume, get the benefits of the price upswing. But the reality is that you need money to keep the platforms going. You need money to increase production. You need money to keep a good play. We don't have that, and that's the reason why we're struggling in the 1 million, 1.2 type terrain. The pipelines are bad. The production platforms are in decline. No new investments are really coming in to look for new finds or develop new discovered but not produced fields. So there are lots of other factors. So I think we should forget crisis. We should look at how do we, and that's why I asked the question at the end, what really is our national philosophy for this sector? Where do we want to land? Is it welfare of the citizenry? Is it market dominance in Africa? Is it to prepare ourselves to be our own internal investors and financials for the ultimate transition movement that will occur, whether it's in 10 years or whether it's in 15 years, depending on what our reserve play is? The answers lie critically here first, and I don't think we're addressing that sufficiently. We seem to be focusing largely on income. How do we benefit from sudden immediate swings and immediate income to cure our appetite for sometimes very gross expenditures?
Professor, thank you so much. I since we can just squeeze one more question out from you. Should a state of emergency be declared in the oil and gas sector as far as upstream is concerned? I'm referring to petroleum, oil theft. Just yesterday, the Central Bank of Nigeria released a circular. They've allowed those initially 43 items that were banned from the official window to be, for FX to be accessed from the I&E window. But the issue is still about supply. Everybody is talking about supply of dollars, which has to come into Nigeria. And our cash cow, of course, is our production. Now, the president already declared a state of emergency for food insecurity. Do you think the same should be done for oil theft? And do you have any thoughts on why we have not been able to arrest this situation, so far?
One, I think the oil sector is already in a state of emergency, declared or undeclared. I mean, the very nature of the volumes that you're producing, the very nature of the huge decline, fairly fast decline in terms of income streams from there, the facts of how many people are going out of work in the sector, and the facts of the exit of multinationals. It's already a state of emergency, whether you want to formally declare it or not. Indeed, the pipeline issues and the oil theft is probably just one of the very many factors that lead you to an inescapable conclusion as a state of emergency. My attitude about oil theft when I did serve was a little bit different. I hear a lot of the hoopla about oil theft. Oil theft is really isn't the major issue confronting this country. It is an issue, don't get me wrong, but we almost make it look like once the oil theft ceases, we're back to where we are. No. Our major issue is investment. Our major issue is regulatory certainty. Our major issue is being able to attract the requisite investments for the sector and being able to plan. And also savings culture by every government that comes. For oil theft, one of the things that we did, if you remember at the time, was we got to this point where there was some disagreement about what do we need to do with whether the actors or the victims of the oil theft. And we then began the modular refinery concept, convert a lot of these individuals into former players in the sector and see how we can benefit from that. I think we've approved about 10 new marginal fields, marginal producers at that time. And right now, I think about 4 of them, if I'm not mistaken, have gone into production, producing products, not necessarily PMS. A lot of them are HU and the other side products because of what is required to set up very heavy catalytic units. But they've started. And then, of course, a lot of incentive was given to the Dangote refinery to do an upswing quickly. I had hoped also that our own refineries will come in. Once we do, some of these, because you ask yourself the question, why was it that when the refineries were very, very active in the 70s and early 80s, you didn't have as much play in terms of oil theft? Because the pipelines were active. They were more they were more focused on in terms of investment, in terms of watch, in terms of security. And so the times that you had for inactive players to come in once in a while and break pipelines and take something was a little bit less. We need to go back to that era. Once the refineries are active, some of these steps will reduce. Also, some of the players in the TEP area will go in as middle level, low level players and workers within the formal sector of refining. That's it. Then again, you need to address the issue of community concerns. If there's a just community engagement, not just one that answers to increasing numbers every 4 or 5 years by 1 percentage factor. Once you can address the issue of holistically, the issue of the oil sector owners, oil sector producers, the dominant communities there, because a lot of the activities take place there. Nobody will tell me that if there's a pipeline being broken in the community, they don't know who is doing it or why it's being done, or the key players. Once they get engaged sufficiently, you'll find out some of these issues will go. So invest in the refining, focus with state governments to become again what they used to be, which were the main security officers of the country, as opposed to waiting for the federal government to come from Abuja to deal with issues that happen in South Ibom or Delta or whatever. Deal with the local chiefs and get them to play an active role in pipeline protection. You will get those out. There are sort of numbers I've seen bandied around over the last couple of years in terms of what comprises the volume of theft. I've been unable to align myself with those, largely because the practicality of operations in those sectors don't lend credence to those. For you to steal that kind of volume of money, you have to get VLCCs packed shore to shore. You have to load them up. You have to move them. And to think that the whole security apparatus will not even pick that up worries me, unless we're saying there's no more, we're in no man's land. So that's important to focus on, but let's focus on the actual existential issues in the oil sector. And once we do that, I think it will at least reduce some of those issues. So emergency, yes, there's already an emergent situation by virtue of all the factors. Crude pipeline theft, crude oil theft and the rest, yes, obviously a very important issue. But once we if we can solve correspondingly the other issues that are critical to this sector, some of those will also go away.
Professor Kachikwu, please, can I indulge you to just answer just one more question? In fact, people are even asking questions. I think I've already asked questions. I would be wrong to deny the participants there. I just saw a question there with someone asking Professor Kachikwu, is Nigeria back to subsidy regime or not? You've seen, they say subsidy was gone, but you see where diesel is and where PMS is. So, Professor, before we let you go, please, so if you can answer from the participants, and please keep sending your questions to Q&A. Go ahead, sir.
Well, let me be very honest. Some of the questions you're asking me, I think I will reserve for those who are in the field of play right now, because they have the data that I don't have. So, answer whether has subsidy come back or not, I will need to look at the last 3 months, geometrics in terms of the numbers. But what tends to happen with subsidy? We did this in 2016, I think, when we did a price escalation. If you do a price escalation without a modulation policy, that is this whole swing policy, prices go up, they come down, they go up, they come down. You're always going to get to a situation where you lose it. And so what has happened is that at point start, subsidy goes. And then something happens with Hamas and prices go up, like Ronke said. And then straight away, it hits you again in terms of those refined product. And then if you then come out and say, this is our price, once it goes up, subsidy is back. Subsidy isn't a thing that is determined on a tangential. It's a thing that's determined by the factuology of the market pricing. So the reality for me is government should stop announcing prices. Issue of this is the price. That's for the private sector to deal with. Private sector should deal with that issue. NNPC would need to get out of 100% importation environment, however they do it, because unless you do that, it's never going to work. If NNPC continues to import and conditions are created for NNPC to import, when the rest of the sector can't import, you have a market dominance and monopoly that cannot let prices come down because everybody will wait for NNPC to take the bull, pay the thing, bring it in, and determine the price, and government therefore has to set a price again. So a lot of things have to happen for subsidy to go. One, market dominance will have to go, and the market has to be liberalized. Two, our production needs to go up, so at least that 445 barrels we used to play around this sector will be back. It's no longer there because we're not producing enough to even protect that. Three, our own refineries will have to work. And so whatever monies we make in subsidy, short-term and long-term, we must pour it into getting our refineries and refining capacity back. Because once you do that, you can then be able to influence the pricing. 4, I have not been able to see, I didn't see it then, I don't see it now, what the benefits are in terms of keeping subsidy. I know there's a lot of emotion about it. Oh, it's a lot of price increase, a lot of issues, suffering, blah, blah, blah. But in an ideal environment, if subsidy is well applied, what you find is that after a while, the prices will begin to modulate and come down. We tried it. And after a few months, you found the marketers were selling at different prices at the time. Some were going down, people were leaving the price stations with very high prices and moving to stations with lower prices. And if you need to have a transitional support, whereby the key sector, which is largely the transporter, who are not using diesel, most of our transporters use diesel, but those who are not using diesel, who need to be supported, you can set up some catchment filling stations run by NNPC, give them specific amounts to just support those over a period of 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 months until the prices stabilize, so you do not have this jet fear that people have. But ultimately, something, a bullet we need to bite. I think the government did the right thing in that. If you ask me, I would do the same thing. But then you need to follow that sequentially, almost immediately, by specific. My palliatives will be different. My palliatives will focus on refineries. My palliatives will focus on support for the transport sector where we can. My palliatives will focus on the unions that control some of these areas. But the speed would largely be to get ourselves refined product sufficient.
Professor Kachikwu, thank you so much for giving us your time. As you were speaking, more questions piling in there. We really appreciate you, Joy, coming back to answer some further questions. And thank you for taking that additional one. Professor Ibe Kachikwu, when is your book coming out? Are you going to give us a date? Is there a release date for the book?
Well, I think it should be out in December. We did the first one, which was, if you remember, amongst the many books we've done, we did the Petroleum Industry Bill, Get Into Years, which was things that they needed to do to get them here. And post that, we're doing something on PIA, the missing links, because again, the PIA that was passed left a lot of the database that we thought we were going to lift along with this whole change out there, not addressed. So we're hoping that we'll be able to point the Assembly's attention to some of those, so that hopefully in a further review of that law, we'll be able to take that along. Some more work still needs to be done in that field.
So yeah, go ahead, sir.
I said hopefully in December.
All right, so we'll aim for December, then we'll keep that date in mind. Thank you so much, our former Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Professor Ibe Kachikwu, our keynote speaker for this webinar from Mustard Insights on the Nigeria's petroleum industry. Thank you so much, sir. All right, really appreciate him giving us his extra time. All right, we have to come back to our panelists now. Let's get to Engineer Olalere Odusote, who is a former Commissioner of Energy for Lagos State. Lagos State, of course, the commercial capital of Nigeria. Engineer Odusote, I guess, still on the upstream side of things, you heard Professor Kachikwu there saying that oil theft is not necessarily Nigeria's major issue. There's also the issue of bringing investments into the country. So, also to point to some recent issues now. With I think it was ExxonMobil divesting from onshore, going offshore, trying to sell its assets to Seplat. That's been in limbo. There's some comments not too long ago saying that should, well, wait to see whether that will clear, because I think NNPCL has right of first refusal. Then we had ENI also wanting to divest from onshore to offshore, trying to get sell its assets, onshore assets to, I think it was Wando. That's, not yet quite there. With these oil and gas giants that are moving offshore and divesting from their onshore assets, you heard Professor Kachikwu say we need investment to come in. Are you worried about that? Is there any way we can bring investment into the onshore space so we can drive up Nigeria's upstream production? Engineer, if you can share your thoughts on that. And also if you want to share your thoughts on the geopolitical matters that are going on and oil prices.
Right, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I don't think I'm in a better position to speak about oil prices than Professor and also Ronke that have spoken about it in the past, but it's not different from other areas of the economy. If I can make a return on my investment in any sector, if the rules are clear, if the laws are clear and supportive of return on investment in any sector, then people will invest in it and will be able to attract investment. It's just that simple. The PIA, like the professor said, took 20 years in the making, created a lot of uncertainty in the sector and led to an exit of a lot of the players in the sector. Like he said, we went from producing over 2 million barrels a day to producing just above 1 million barrels a day because of the exit of the strong players in the sector. And it's that lack of investment that has led, to be honest, in the loss in security in that sector and to the rise in oil theft. The rise in oil theft is not the problem. It's just the uncertainty in the sector and the lack of clarity of what the laws are and what my returns will be in investing in that sector that's leading to a flight of capital investment in that sector. But I think more importantly, what everyone has said is there's too much of a focus on the outside and not enough of focus on what we should be doing in the country. How are we utilizing our own infrastructure to improve our competitive base as a country, our resources to improve our competitiveness as a country? We export oil, we import refined petroleum products. I think one of the speakers mentioned that we don't spend more importing refined petroleum products than we earn in exporting oil. This that happened at some point. Doesn't make any sense. Why are we looking on the outside? Why are we not developing our industry locally? If you look at what Prof said earlier, he spoke about the energy transition and he spoke about our ownership of gas resources, which is a transition fuel, and its importance in our positioning. It's very simple. In Nigeria, let's look at within the country itself. 70% of the gas that's consumed locally goes to the electricity market. If you discount the amount of gas that's going to the industry that's actually going to electricity, it actually increases that number to about 85%. So 85% of the gas that's produced in Nigeria, that's consumed in Nigeria, goes to the electricity sector. And you ask yourself, how is the electricity sector able to support the upstream gas industry? It is not. It is owed a lot of money. And so you say, if we're looking at the petroleum value chain on the gas side, most of the gas that we consume domestically goes to the power sector. That's where that value chain leads to. How is the power sector organized? Are the people at the end of the power sector getting the electricity that they want, and are they incentivized to pay? And do the laws support the collection of debts from the people who consume electricity? If the answer is no, there'll be no investment in upstream gas. So our problem is not just external, it's also internal. We need to look at our own internal procedures, our internal laws, and our ability to enforce them, and also the intent of those policies and laws. Do the intent of the policy lead to universal access to electricity and an ability to collect monies? If they don't, then we need to look at it again and start to look at how we can reorient the sector to benefit ourselves. Do we want to export all our gas? At some point, we'll export the gas. The people who are abroad will manufacture things using the gas that they've produced electricity from and then export them back to us. Do we want to stay in that perpetual cycle of exporting resources and importing refined goods and make ourselves it's unsustainable, to be honest, and that's the cycle we find ourselves. When we start thinking internally, when we start thinking about how we can refine our own our own oil, produce our own refined petroleum products, use it to make ourselves more competitive, then we can start to talk about dominating certain spaces. Otherwise, we can't. We can't dominate spaces on just our ability to export raw resources. We simply cannot do it. We've been doing it for 50 years. And if we continue to do that, we'll find ourselves in the same place. We're not going to grow. I think that's what I have to say on that.
Engineer Odusote, I understand you also have a press, but everybody, our panelists are also busy. Let me quickly follow up with you on gas, just very, very quickly. I think we just got news yesterday or the day before that the AKK, that the 614 kilometer AKK pipeline is going to be completed. I believe it's August of next year. So that's been there for quite a while. They've been working on that for quite a while. But we hope that gets completed. On the domestic front, engineer, is our population working against us? And I ask this question because I just filled up my 12.5 cylinder cooking gas just the other day. It's 12,000 naira now. It was 10,000 not just less than a month ago. Now it's back, so they are rising. And the issues, I understand that even gas that we're exporting has had to be turned around to try to address domestic consumption. But this issue of domestic consumption keeps coming up. We can't meet domestic consumption for sugar. We can't meet domestic consumption for flour, wheat, right? We can't meet domestic consumption for a whole number of other matters. So in that regard, is it that the investment is not able to meet up with the sheer population, and so we'll always have these supply issues in trying to meet up? Or should we just, cut our losses and just export and see how much we can raise? How do you see that dynamic?
It's very, our population would only work in our favor if we decide to let it work in our favor. And like I said, we have to be deliberate about the policies and the laws that we pass. We have the lowest per capita consumption of LPG in West Africa. We should not. And the reason is very simple. What's our import? I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the import capacity we have for LPG, because what we started to do was to import LPG in the beginning, is so low that it doesn't even make any sense. If we decided that we wanted to supply LPG to everybody in Nigeria, we couldn't. And so everybody, in the absence of the availability of LPG, will start to use other things like firewood, if you will, and continue to pollute the environment and endanger themselves some more. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that LPG is available in the volumes that we need it. So when we talk about economies of scale, the more people we get to use LPG, the more production of LPG we'll have, and the prices will come down as we start to get the volumes in. So our population is certainly not working against us, and we must get out of thinking about exporting raw materials alone. Because again, like I said, our ability to be productive and our ability to be competitive is dependent on our ability to harness the resources that we have, the natural resources that we have as a country, and use them for productive use. That's what we really must do when we're talking about LPG. Let's go back to AKK. Now, this is my opinion, and it's going to be unpopular in certain circles. Why do we want to complete the AKK? What exactly is the purpose of that AKK? Who is at the end of it that's going to offtake the gas that's there? Is it just an expensive exercise? When it started, it was supposed to be a pre-investment for the Trans-Sahara gas pipeline. Who is a signatory to the Trans-Sahara Gas Pipeline project? Is there anybody at the end of it that's going to take that pipeline on across the Sahara? Have we signed those contracts? When we started, we looked at 3 power plants that were going to be in Abuja, Kaduna, and Kano that were going to be the anchor customers for that AKK pipeline. And we looked at the numbers of the AKK pipeline at that time, and it still was not going to recover the cost of the pipeline over the life of the plants. So the question was, are there any other off-takers at the end of it? When we make these large investment plans, do we make them with sustainability in mind? Do we make them with productivity in mind? Or are we just awarding a huge contract? Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't have a problem with it if indeed it was a pre-investment for the Trans-Sahara Gas Pipeline. But that has not made much progress. First, it's taken us far longer than we should have to complete that pipeline. OB3 pipeline is another one that was 85% complete about 6 years ago. It's still maybe about 90% complete 6 years later. We have a knack for starting these big projects and then just not completing them because there's been no business plan that's been written around them. And it's something that we keep doing. Let's talk about what we need to do. Let's talk about the petroleum value chain all the way to the end of the gas value chain, which is electricity, and ask ourselves, where exactly are the bottlenecks? Do we have an integrated resource plan that we're diligently prosecuting that's going to ensure that the people who want electricity get it, pay for it, such that we're able to pay for the distribution, transmission, generation, and the gas that's going into the electricity market? If we don't have that plan in place and we're not diligently prosecuting it to ensure that it's a sustainable plan, then we're just running in the same circles as we've been running for the past 60 years of our existence as a country. And that needs to change. At some point, the policymakers need to look at it again and say, are we awarding a contract for the sake of awarding a contract? Are we awarding a contract because it's going to lead to a development of the Nigerian industry? Those are the things that we need to start doing seriously, such that we can then start to make progress as a nation. Otherwise, we'll continue to react to to international incidents and say, oh, all prices have gone up. Oh, it's supposed to benefit Nigeria, but it's not. We're not able to react to all prices going up or going down because in our own country, we have not taken the discipline to even fix the value chain issues. It's really just that simple.
Thank you so much for your thoughts there, Engineer Odusote. I have to bring in Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, who is, of course, the director at Basumoh Nigeria. So, Mr. Akpan, we've heard from the former Commissioner for Energy at Lagos State. He's saying focus, domestically. This price swings are out of your control. And Professor Kachikwu was also of the same opinion. But we need FX, right? We need foreign exchange, and that seems to be the main conversation for Nigeria now. And so there is that pressure on exports. Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, can you weigh in on that dynamic, well, at least as far as where the conversation is now, addressing Nigeria's energy domestic issues here versus the need to export our natural resources to earn income and so on and so forth?
Good morning, Rotus. Yeah, coming from the downstream sector, I believe the demand for the energy in terms of gas by the Nigerian population wouldn't actually impact the level of growth we're looking for in that sector. In terms of the rise in dollar, the Nigerian products in terms of gas and the petroleum products and its byproducts so far are also tied into the dollar, because Nigeria at the end of the day has to buy these products internationally, and whatsoever conversion we're using would actually impact how domestically it will be consumed. We remember quite frankly that the gas has always been on the rise, right? Gas has been on an increase for a long period of time. Like you just said, you bought it 10,000 about 2 weeks ago. And this week now, it's being sold for 12,000. The ability for Nigeria to actually devise a means of production and then exporting these products would have a greater deal and a greater impact on the Nigerian economy rather than consumption. And if you look at the margin in terms of how these products are being sold internationally, and how the consumers are actually purchasing here in the downstream sector, you tend to see that these things are actually controlled by the forex markets in terms of the market forces, the high demand for dollar, and the constant increase in the value of these products internationally. When we compare these situations, we end up seeing that the international forces are the ones actually driving the whole market situation. The consumers are only on the end side, and you don't actually see the full picture of what is actually going on at the market forces that determine how these products are actually being sold to them. So I believe the energy situation and the whole demand situation for products in Nigeria will still be in a greater angle be determined by the international forces, which are actually tied to the dollar and the whole market exchange rate.
Thank you for that. I do want Dr. Awoyinfa and Ronke to also weigh in on this. Dr. Awoyinfa, let me bring you back in. What's your view on this push-pull, I guess, dynamic or between energy needs at home and the need to export?
Thanks, Rotus. I mean, looking at it from a purely financial perspective, I think in terms of the groundwork that needs to be done, we've certainly talked extensively today about policies, about the direction, and putting all of those into consideration. At the end of the day, it's really about the numbers. So we need to critically assess to say which of these directions, one would have a positive net effect for the country from a forex inflow perspective. And also we need to consider the benefits to the people as well. So again, it's not always just about the numbers. There's the overall economy to think about. There's job creation perspectives to be considered. there's even the sustainability side of things, which is often less discussed, and how that interplays with the direction that we decide to go. Fundamentally, it boils down to policies. It boils down to the thought process that goes into those policies as well. As Prof mentioned earlier, what is the strategy? What's our selling point? Where do we want to go as a country on a national level? And obviously that would trickle down into specific projects and specific companies. So there's no clear-cut answer, I would say. It's really around the net positive effect, or picking a solution that has the best possible outcomes for Nigeria from an inflow perspective, cash flow input perspective, and also to benefit the economy as a whole.
Thank you so much for that. Ronke Onadeko, please, can you weigh in as well on how you see this, the dynamic domestic energy needs, exports, and so on?
Okay, so I'm going to take a perspective and a bit deeper than Tolu did. There are 4 things that actually come to my mind. And I like to look at things from a very holistic perspective. I looked at the numbers 2020, 2021, 2022, and Nigeria imports a quarter of the volume of petroleum products that come into the continent. And that's about 500,000. I think the total amount that comes in is averaging about 2.2 million barrels per day. And what that tells me is that if we had our refining capacity, we could eliminate that. Beyond that, we should start looking how to take in the different, the other volumes coming onto the continent. First and foremost, we'll make savings, dollar savings, if we're not importing and we're producing locally, in-house, in Nigeria. And then 2, transportation on the continent is a lot cheaper and more beneficial to us in our net financial position if we're doing that on the continent. It gives us more leverage on the continent, it gives us more money, and it also consolidates our place as the supposed, great nation on the continent. That's one aspect. Another thing that Prof had talked about was the fact that we're so out there trying to solve things like oil theft. My position on that is that the pie for oil and gas on the nation is so small that everybody's eyes are focused on what is being stolen. If we focused on growing the pie to such a large amount, the actual cost and losses going into oil theft will diminish. So if we're able to bring in investors to grow the pie of exploration and local production, the amount that would be stolen will not decrease, will not grow significantly from what it is, but on the whole picture, the slice will become thinner, the effect will become less, and our gains become more just from growing the pie. My third angle is infrastructure. We talk a lot about if we could do this with gas, if we had more gas. We don't have the infrastructure to follow through on the wishes that we have. Gathering gas, storing gas, distributing gas are issues that we haven't dealt with. So even if we begin to clamp down on gas flaring, do we have the mechanisms and the infrastructure in place to gather the gas, to store the gas, to convert it into what is utilized by Nigerians to improve the number of people using gas and the accessibility to gas? It's actually easier for Nigeria to export its gas than to harness the gas we have in-house and utilize within the continent. So those are some of the things that I think we need to start looking at internally. The last thing is the Forex needs. We're going around, having, shows around the world saying we're looking for investors to come into the oil industry, into Nigeria. The fact is that, are we looking for Forex to continue business as usual, which is for trading and marketing, exporting and importation, or are we looking for Forex to come in so that we can start developing other aspects of the Nigerian economy, more strategic aspects, looking for people who want to go into infrastructure development, looking for people who are going to go into the area of exploration and production? So those are the 4 things that actually come to my mind. What exactly are we looking for money for? Business as usual or strategy? Are we looking for money so that we can grow the oil and gas industry pie to such a large size that a sliver of that pie being taken out as oil theft will not even affect the larger picture or how much we're bringing in on a total. And then there's also the issue of infrastructure. And then, we have to start thinking in terms of when we have policy decisions to make, do we have politicians and technocrats sitting there making those decisions? Or are we going to start bringing in commercial people and entrepreneurs to have their voice, lend their voice to those issues, so that we're making deals and making plans that are commercially sensible and sustainable and beneficial to the nation? So that's my take on that.
Thank you very much, Ronke Onadeko. Those 4 strong points. So you know what? This now, let me bring Engineer Odusote back in, because Engineer, you are saying focus domestically, but Ronke is questioning the infrastructure around us, particularly for gas, for us to be able to address those needs. So that brings you to the Petroleum Industry Act, which of course Professor Kachikwu spoke about. A very simple question. I guess I'll start with you, Engineer Odusote. Have we missed the boats on the PIA? Took 20 years to get here, and we're supposed to be trying to get, you're supposed to be attracting investment as well as addressing our infrastructure issues. Is the PIA, is it too late? And I also want to respond to Ronke's point about the infrastructure challenges that would allow us to be able to address our, domestic needs as well. Engineer Odusote, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. On the PIA, have we missed the boat? As long as we're still producing, we haven't missed the boat. If our products are no longer in demand on the market and we've missed the market that we could have sold it into, then yes, we have. But as long as it's still a product that's tradable on the international market, then there's still a chance for us to get it right. Regarding infrastructure development for domestic competitiveness improvement, that's something that's it's non-negotiable if we're going to continue to be relevant. It's very simple. When people talk about, and it's been mentioned here, the devaluation of the naira that's apparent on the global market, it's simply responding to demand and supply. If everything that we utilize in Nigeria we import, then there's a serious demand for foreign exchange. And if we don't export that much, then there's no demand for the naira, because then nobody needs the naira to buy Nigerian goods. And that's really what happens. If that balance then does not exist, then the naira will just keep dropping until we find until we either decide to change the currency, like some other countries have done, to a foreign currency, until we then are able to reach some sort of equilibrium as to when the demand for foreign exchange then hits that balance. So it's really very simple. Now, how do we address that? It's by improving the products that we have to export to the global international market. And the way to do that is not by exporting our raw materials to improve their own competitiveness, but to harness our raw materials to improve our own competitiveness. Because it's very simple. When we don't produce anything, and the way to produce is to ensure that there's electricity, is to ensure that the raw materials for the production, we don't export them, but we utilize them locally, whether it's cobalt, whether it's lithium, whether it's gas for electricity, whether it's cocoa, or whatever it is that you have. If we're not able to add value to it locally and be able to then trade the high value products on the international market, then we really don't have anything to defend our naira with except the products that we export. Hitherto, historically, that's simply been oil. And the fact of the matter is that our consumption of refined products has outpaced our export of oil. And some people will argue that a lot of that is due to the subsidy regime that we have, and the fact that a lot of those products that are subsidized actually go to other markets other than Nigeria. That is true. But we're still at the same point that we're importing expensive petrol and exporting crude oil. We can then lay that back into say we're exporting gas. I don't have a problem with exporting gas as long as we're able to produce enough gas to use both domestically and to export and earn foreign exchange from doing that. But we certainly must use that gas to improve our competitiveness. It's a transition fuel of choice. We have made that case on the global market that we have to continue to invest in it, at least until we get to a point where we can then start to use renewable sources of renewable sources of energy, which I've been at many global fora where we see that even those renewable sources that we talk about, like wind, is actually it's not as beneficial to the environment as we say it is, because the manufacturing process for wind turbines is not clean. And so if we're producing energy from an unclean source, then we can't add that to the net zero targets that we're talking about, except that the production is done in other countries, which goes to the point of we're still importing and we're not producing locally. So it's I'm not sure if I've missed any of the questions. If I have, please remind me of it.
You hit all of them on the head. You hit all of them on the head. And I do want to get to the renewable part. I think Tolu Awoyinfa might want to fight you on that comment you made on wind. So I'm going to get to renewable energy in just a moment. But let me, and thank you so much, Engineer Odusote. Let me quickly go to Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan. Mr. Akpan, where do you stand on the PIA? Engineer Odusote said we haven't missed the boat. As long as we're still producing, there's still hope there. And you know, so where's your stand on that? And I guess also the infrastructure matters that Ronke brought up in terms of addressing Nigeria's energy needs. Is that, do you say, look, until we get the infrastructure right, we just have to export for now and earn income? So, Mr. Akpan, where do you stand on that?
Concerning the PIA, I actually agree with the engineer concerning the structures. We don't have the existing structures to actually take care of the PIA and what the request of Nigeria. So for the meantime, I do agree in the aspect of we exporting whatsoever we have, exporting our product, exporting things to actually help with the Nigerian currency, because we don't have the structure, as he has already said, to actually finance and then do what we're supposed to do.
And then okay, so you're in agreement with that. Okay, fantastic. All right, so let me now go to renewable energy. Mr. Akpan, what are your thoughts there? I do want to come to Dr. Awoyinfa in a moment, but so here's the way I'm putting this forward. Enugu, for example, coal city. Coal is very much, you know, in abundance here in Nigeria, but it's quote unquote dirty, right? But it can address our needs. I think I've checked the energy mix for the UK, China, a number of coal is still heavily used. How do you fit that in with the push for renewables? And I know that Africa as a whole does not contribute to carbon emissions as much as the Chinas, the United States, and everywhere else. But I mean, I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, right? Where do you fall on the renewable energy transition for Nigeria, keeping in mind that we're still heavily fossil fuel dependent? Mr. Akpan.
Renewable energy for Nigeria, I believe Nigeria still has a lot to do. We still have it's still a very viable market, and renewable energy it is actually sustainable. So I believe Nigeria still has a lot of infrastructure to actually put in place to be able to actually tap into the renewable energy market properly. And we can see that we already have some raw materials available for us domestically that we could actually harness and get byproducts and also export, and it becomes another source of income. And like we've seen, and as we've seen, the fossil products rather it's phasingly actually exiting the whole the current state of the market, because everyone is trying to move to renewable energy, sustainable energy, so as to actually get a good enhanced climate conditions worldwide. So I believe Nigeria still has a long way to go in terms of infrastructure, until we get the infrastructure right, before we can actually harness the productivity and the market for renewable energy.
Thank you for that, Mr. Akpan. Okay, so Dr. Awoyinfa, I'm coming back to you. Renewable energy, you know, you've been on the Global Business Report on RICV. You've talked about that. I think it was in Egypt. Egypt was investing about 10 billion or so on solar panels, or was it wind? So I know that you are bullish on renewable energy. Do you want to respond to Engineer Odusote's comments on wind not necessarily being that viable? And what are your thoughts on Nigeria's energy transition conversation, considering the fact that Enugu states and all these other states have, you know, coal deposits and other quote unquote dirty fossil fuels? Dr. Awoyinfa.
Interestingly, Rotus, I think you may be mixing me up with someone else, because I have a very similar view to Mr. Leary on this. But just before I touch on that point on renewables, I would just like to take us back to the PIE for a minute. I mean, I know we've talked about how we spent 20 years getting to where we getting the documents, the act signed, and we're now 2 years in. What we are starting to see, I mean, before we even go into that, we are, as a sector and from a financing and investment point of view, I think the uncertainty that has plagued the industry for easily 20 years is gone, right? So we have an act, we can refer to it, it's in place. However, as we know, a lot of decisions and that are made within the sector and within the context of an act is tied to precedents. So for example, under the PIE, there are a lot of elements that are untested to date. For example, when it comes to the point around conversion of licenses from moving from the PPTA Act, which is now defunct, into the PIE, what we're seeing now is, whilst the Act spells out the process and the elements that need to go into that, because we don't really have a lot of precedents, financiers are a bit uncertain about how that will play out. Again, for another, just to come down into one specific point as well, there's been a recent adjunct to the PIE in relation to the computation of royalties as an addendum, which was recently gazetted. So, I mean, all of this uncertainty poses a problem. Investors like risk, they can manage risk, but they need to be able to quantify that risk. And that's really what we're saying. So I think for the PIE, it's really a matter of time. We'll just continue to monitor the sector and, be at the forefront of what's going on such that we're able to support the financing. Now, coming back to your point on wind and renewables, I'm going to just take a leaf out of the book that Mrs. Ronke mentioned earlier. We need to be telling our own story when it comes to energy transition. Energy transition is very different from country to country, from continent to continent. The current global, and for lack of a better word, agenda is one that is born out of what has happened historically in the West in terms of the emissions, the global warming that we're seeing, which obviously is a global problem which impacts us as well. So when it comes to energy transition, it has to be addressed from a nuanced perspective. We need to address energy transition in a way and an approach that works for us. One key element, which I believe that we as a country are aligned with the rest of the world on this, is really the focus on gas. About a year ago, Europe did what I would call a bit of a U-turn, or maybe a 90-degree turn on gas. Gas has now been labeled as a transition gas. 3 years ago, it was a different conversation. Gas was essentially put under the same category as oil, which is negative emissions and so on. However, now we're seeing, and it's more globally accepted now, that gas is a key transition fuel, and we need to key on that. When it comes to the other renewable sources of energy, I imagine, and based on what we're seeing now, and wind energy, solar power will continue to be a part of our energy mix. However, we need to drive our own narrative when it comes to energy transition and, align our policies with that and ensure that we are positioned for that in a way that benefits us as a country.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, Ronke Onadeko, let me come to you. If you want to also touch on the PIA, whether missed the boat or not, and also on renewable energy and Nigeria's own story. Ronke, are you still with us?
Yes, I am. Okay, so I'll just go back to the PIA issue. And the two things that the PIA was supposed to deliver to us as a nation, one was a conducive investment environment. Have we started to see that in the last 2 years? No, I haven't. The other thing was sector growth. So for me, I'm not going with a feel of what did they say? What was it supposed to deliver, and are we seeing it? It's not delivered any of the two things that it set out to do. So I think it's time that we go back and find out why, after the act has been passed, it's now a law. Why are we not seeing the benefits of the PIA? And what do we need to either sensitize the international community, tweak whatever we have on ground to ensure that those two issues are delivered? It might be through the PIA, it might be through the people, it might be through the faces that we're putting out into the world about where Nigeria is and what we're doing. Or is it that the things we're chasing after are not that relevant to the rest of the world? I think those are some of the things that we need to go back and check to ensure that the PIA really delivers on those two issues. On the issue of renewables, I look back at 30 years ago when, maybe like 35 years ago when I got into the oil industry, and at that time it was very fossil fuel dependent. Everybody was chasing after the next discovery through exploration and production. Good that we've moved away from that and the energy mix has changed. My first priority is that you look at what you have an abundance of in your local environment. Our two biggest assets right now, other than oil, is coal and gas. I know that the Bank of China and I think it's BOI that have put out a $500 million fund to ensure that gas flaring comes to an end. And that's a great posturing. However, where is the equivalent of that kind of fund for coal? Europe, the US, other countries, China, have explored and exploited their gas to their best advantage. Why are we not doing the same? Why is our narrative chasing after the Paris Convention and that convention? We need to look inwards and we need to stand our grounds. The carbon footprint of Nigeria is not as detrimental as that of the other countries that are saying, let's move out of fossil fuel. So we need to have our own agenda and let the world know that we're following an agenda that makes the most sense for us in this time and in this season. It's just one of the many ways in which we're going to power our nation so that enterprise and development and growth can take place. It's not forever and it's not our only source. However, I think Nigeria needs to make a clear stand to the world that we will exploit our gas, we will exploit our coal, and we will continue to exploit fossil fuel because it's an ongoing thing, it's going to continue. The whole world in Europe right now are focused on everybody going into wind, into solar, into hydro. They control the narrative, they control the technology, and it's expensive. So why are we going to earn dollars from our gas and invest in what they have to sell to us, which ends up making us more dependent on their agenda and their narrative than for us to start to chart a path to our growth and our development. So I think we really need to go back to the drawing board as a nation. There was a big no about it. Now that it's been readjusted because of the availability of gas in respect to other fossil fuels and renewable energy and the cost, they have now turned around and shifted the goalpost on the whole world to now include it in a transition fuel. We need to take advantage of that right now. Initially, all the international banks were not able to finance products and projects that were oil and gas based. Now that that window of opportunity has opened, as a nation, how have we strategized to ensure that we drive a lot of investments into our gas sector and shift the money that the Bank of China and Bank of Industry have put in place for gas into something like coal? So that 500 million should be going towards something like coal because there's access, commercial access, and access to international funding for gas. So those are my things, those are the things that I'm thinking about, that as a nation, I need to see a bit more responsiveness to opportunities as they open. Nigeria isn't talking about these things. We don't want to be talking about it when the funds that are available for these things are depleted or when competition is so high. We need to get to the table early and claim our spaces.
Thank you so much for that, Ronke Onadeko. Okay, let me come back to Engineer Odusote, since your comment is what sparked off the renewable energy discussion. Ronke made a very strong point, which a lot of folks agree with. We shouldn't be tied to the agenda of the West when it comes to energy transition. But Engineer, is there a chance that you get left behind? For example, if you look at vehicles, I know Rishi Sunak had a speech not too long ago where he said he was moving the deadline for the ban on fossil fuel or petrol cars from, I think it was 2030, he moved it to 2035. So he's moved it back a bit, saying that the transition shouldn't, we have to be realistic about that transition. But Engineer, if we are going to follow our own narrative and stick to our own story and exploit our own resources, is there a chance we get left behind? So for instance, if everyone else, 2035 is only 12 years from now, it's not too far, right? It's just a little over a decade. If everybody else has moved on from petrol guzzling cars and they're all using electric cars and we're still here with, using petrol guzzling cars, what kind of effect is that? Is that even a real threat? Should we even be worried about that? What's your take on our own narrative versus how far and how fast the rest of the world is moving in terms of the energy transition?
All right, so two things quickly. Last time I checked, we don't manufacture vehicles in Nigeria. So in terms of the shift of the technology, it really is not going to affect us that much. The way it's going to affect us is the need for the grid to be able to support charging for electricity vehicles, if and when we get to that point, because we are going to that point. We're just not going to get there as quickly. We've talked about the transition fuel. The federal government has made a play for, they've made a decade of gas announcement, and we're talking about, and NNPC is busy with the federal government today trying to talk about moving CNG, pushing CNG and trying to get CNG conversion and CNG fuels across the country. Now, we're 10 years late, right? Because that's what everybody was doing 10 years ago. Today, not a single OEM in the vehicular industry is talking about CNG anymore, at least not for passenger cars. They are not. Everybody is moving to electric. About 6 years ago, we had some of the major OEMs coming out with CNG vehicles, having supported aftermarket transition for the 5 years before, for like 15 years before. But today, nobody's talking about that. So we're talking about electricity. And in Nigeria, we're also looking at that as well. For us, because we don't manufacture them, it's not a question of being left behind technologically. We still have to generate the electricity that's going to power those vehicles. So for us, it's not a big problem. What we should be looking at, right, is ramping up our electricity production in Nigeria to improve attractiveness. Let me give the example of Lagos. Lagos gets 1.2 gigawatts of electricity from the national grid today. That's the peak that Lagos gets. Lagos has arguably, depending on who you speak to, between 20 and 26 million inhabitants. Those 20 to 26 million inhabitants of Lagos do not rely on 1.2 gigawatts of electricity supply from the grid. From our estimates, we have about 23,000 megawatts of diesel capacity idling around Lagos, of which at any point in time, our estimate is that between 4,500 and 5,000 megawatts of those capacities are operational, right? And if that is the case, then we have a very expensive electricity situation in Lagos. Lagos is the industrial base of Nigeria, it's industrial capital of Nigeria, and we're running on expensive electricity, which means that we're not nearly as competitive as we should be, just based on electricity alone. So if we were to then try to fix that problem by improving the amount of cheap electricity that's available on the grid, what we're going to need to do is to use gas to do that. That's the fastest way to the market. If you look at South Africa has 44 gigawatts of electricity generation for 62 million people, right? Of that, only about 28 gigawatts is available because a lot of their coal plants are getting out of life, and for some reason they haven't made the decision to renew them. They have started, but they're also far behind, and that's why they're getting close to the Nigerian situation of having rolling blackouts and brownouts all over the country. We've been in that situation for the past since 1990, where we've started having rolling blackouts to a point where it's now a fact of life in Nigeria that there's just no grid electricity available. It's a crisis situation that we overlooked many years ago, and it's one that we need to address now if we're to affect our own capacity to start to improve our productivity as a country. Because again, like I said, if our productivity is low, we have nothing to trade on the international market, and it's going to affect the price, continue to affect the price of our currency, because we're demanding for external products, we're demanding for foreign exchange. When we start producing locally, our demand for foreign exchange will naturally drop. That's how supply and demand works. It's that simple. Now let's talk about coal. Medupi is a plant that's been developed in South Africa, and it's about 10 years. Coal takes way too long for you to bring to life. So if we're going to look at coal, I really don't have a problem with it. I think we should. But if we're trying to accelerate our competitiveness and accelerate our development of electricity infrastructure, the answer to us is just gas. It's now financeable, like everybody has said. And so we really just need to do that. We should not keep going around trying to look for solutions when we have the solution in place. We certainly need to start looking at alternatives like coal, but that's not going to get us to where we need to get to very quickly. And really, again, on electricity, we need to just get the electricity produced. Electricity produced from coal power electric cars is not as good as electricity produced from renewables power electric cars, because then we get the benefit of the net zero, but it's just moving in the right direction. We need to get the electricity produced in the country. Let's focus on that.
Thank you so much for that, Engineer Odusote. I think, Ronke, you have your hand up. Did you want to quickly say something?
I wanted to buttress some of the points that Larry had just talked about, why it's very important that the government should immediately start looking for multiple initiatives to support the gas sector. There was a report by the International Renewable Energy Agency that Nigeria has the potential to generate 60% of its energy demand by 2050 through a myriad of ways, gas being the first, obviously, solar, hydro, wind, and coal. But the important thing about it is that if we use all of these things, we have the potential to stimulate our internal economy. If Nigeria becomes a country that gas or electricity, for example, is that much cheaper, you begin to see that companies like China, where electricity is still expensive because of the demand, might start moving some of their cheaper, lower level production to countries like Nigeria. We have the space, we have the numbers in terms of their market, we have also the skill sets that they can bring in, and that's what's going to generate innovation, entrepreneurship, job creation, and utilizing what we already have locally. So I just want to really see government coming together, policymakers, entrepreneurs, commercial people, bankers, come together and sit down and rub minds together. Everybody's working in silos at the moment. And policies are coming out that don't make commercial sense. Immediately, the funds came out and gas moved and became a transition fuel. The first thing to do is, how can we access a certain percentage of that? You need people to start churning out ideas, churning out proposals, and targeting different financial institutions to find how we can drive that finance into Nigeria. Which partners do we need to come together with? Which countries have done what we're trying to do, so that we leverage relationships, we leverage our advantages. No other country in the world can boast of a youth population, a skill set, and natural gas, coal, and oil that we have in this country at the moment. So why are we not using it to our advantage? We're chasing shadows in silos. We need to bring all of those things together to ensure that we harness as quickly as possible the leverage and the possibilities that come from this.
Thank you for that. Well said. Thank you. Very engaging here. Again, this is brought to you folks by Mustard Insights. I know we're going to be looking at that PriceWiz app in just a moment, but I quickly want to bring in Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan. You're in downstream, so I have to touch on this subsidy matter because I keep seeing the question popping up in our Q&A. So I asked Professor Kachikwu earlier. He kind of wanted to, leave it to others on the panel here. Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, is the subsidy back? Because oil prices have been climbing and diesel is now at 1,000. Meanwhile, PMS is at 578. It hasn't seemed to have moved. What's the impact? Do our finances get, encumbered again? Where have you seen what's been happening with the whole fuel subsidy matter downstream in Nigeria?
Thank you, Rotus. Concerning the fuel subsidy matter, I believe fuel subsidy is back. It's back because internationally we were aware that petrol is supposed to be sold at the same rate with diesel. We can see diesel getting up to the rate of 1,000, 1,100, 1,002. The reason why petrol remains at 575 of that region is because it's being subsidized by the federal government. So it's the only benefit to it is that it's not as much as a burden as it was earlier. You can recall that before the subsidy removal came in, petrol was being sold at a rate of 145, 170 something within that range. But the burden of fuel subsidy was a lot on the federal government. But now within that period, and as we speak, we can see that the rate at which the product is being sold has increased, that's climbed to 600 or something. That doesn't mean it is not still being subsidized, it is, but not as much as it used to be. So that's the only difference that it will have. If subsidy is completely removed, petrol prices will go up to 1,000 naira thereabouts. You can see that in other countries, they're already being sold for 800 naira compared to the naira and the currency values and all that. So we can see that fuel subsidy is back.
Thank you for that. Okay, so I guess less of a burden. I would like everybody to weigh in on this subsidy matter. So Dr. Awoyinfa, back to you. How are you seeing things for Nigeria and where oil prices are and fuel prices are and subsidy matter?
Well, I mean, to say it's back, I mean, what we have today is akin to a subsidy, right? In terms of what we're seeing in the market. I do not know, and I don't know that we can say that it's actually back, but essentially the free market effect that happens when you lift the subsidy in a fully deregulated market, we're not seeing that at the moment. So there is some sort of anchor which is in place that is keeping prices artificially low, I would say, lower than what we would expect. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's acting like a subsidy. If it looks like a subsidy, acts like a subsidy, probably is. But in terms of just the labeling, I'm just a bit conscious of that. However, the concern I have is from an economics perspective, right? There's a reason why a scenario where a free market is preferred. Right, it encourages competition. I think Mr. Akpan had mentioned earlier over the course of this webinar about how prices, you have people moving from one station to the other looking for the cheapest source of fuel, and that is what you find when a market it's a free market. Private investors, anyone that is willing to play in that market operates, and it's really a function of it going to the highest bidder. We're not seeing that at the moment. So I think it's something that we just need to continue to pay attention to. I'm just wary of sliding back into a scenario that is similar to what we had previously with the subsidy. And I think it's something that we should pay attention to. It's not the preferred. I know that this is a very sensitive topic given the impact it's had on people's lives, but in the long term, and I think that's part of what we're discussing today, in the long term, a free, fully deregulated market is where we should be going.
Thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, on that point, Ronke Onadeko, let me come back to you. I guess your thoughts on where we are, whether we're back in subsidy or not, and then if you were to truly allow the free market to move, as Mr. Akpan was saying, you'd be paying for fuel where diesel is. You've got the labor unions and all this other stuff. So where do you weigh in on this, Ronke?
Okay, so for me, the price that we're seeing PMS at, for example, between 600 and 700 naira is an artificial price. There's no doubt about that. And we've seen in the news over the last month or so, different times when the federal government has come out to say that we will ensure that prices do not go beyond a particular amount. If anyone can tell you where prices can be stabilized at, that means there's an intervention of some sort by them. So whether they come out and tell us that they've started doing the subsidy in some form or the other, that is the reality. There is some subsidy on the fuel. My issues are a few. One, we've gone out into the international market to borrow foreign exchange to subsidize one. Two, to do the palliatives route. We cannot be doing both. If we're going to take the bullet, let's either take the palliatives, whereby we borrowed money and we're going to have to pay expensive returns because we will pay back the actual funds and the interest over it over a longer period of time. Or we go cold turkey and say, you know what, we made a mistake, we're going back to subsidy. That way we can measure it and cap it on an annual basis. So doing both for me is an issue. The issue of palliatives, as Professor Kachikwu said, if we're going to do palliatives, why are we giving out cash to certain people for only 6 months? So I rent a shop and I stock my shop. After 6 months, the palliatives stop. What am I supposed to thereafter? Why are we not putting the palliatives into the refineries, which are long-term and beneficial and sustainable, or even into retrofitting vehicles and moving to something like CNG, or the distribution of CNG, which we are short of, or incentives by government to ensure that individuals move their cars from purely petrol to perhaps CNG. Whether we focus on public transportation or commercial transportation first, or we put it towards rail. We need to be doing something sensible and reasonable with borrowed money that we have to pay back with interest, than giving a piecemeal 6 month, not enough fund to individuals. And I know Nigeria, we all know Nigeria very well. If anybody is giving you 40,000, before they give you that 40,000, the person is asking you that you give them 20,000 to keep your name on the list. So we know that the entire palliatives are not going to reach the hands and the homes that they need to reach. So what are we gaining from that? So I think we need to relook at all of these things and figure out a way that's sustainable and long-term to ensure that we're not digging a deeper hole for a farther future than we are right now.
Thank you so much for that, Ronke. Engineer Odusote, please, your thoughts on where we are with on the downstream side, the whole subsidy matter. Okay, it looks like Engineer Odusote may not be with us at this point. Maybe he may have hopped off because I know he did have only a few minutes to join us. So a lot of great thoughts that have been shared so far. So I think, anyway, we're supposed to have ended by 11:45. So Ronke has taken us bang on to where this part of the discussion was supposed to end. So it's 11:43. So we've got about just a 2-minute window. So I think now is a good time. And of course, for those that are still sharing their comments and questions in the Q&A box, we'll get to that. A lot of it is on subsidies, but we'll get to that in a moment. I'm very curious to see this demo from Mustard Insights on price whiz. So let's take a look, because I rely on all these types of things to keep up with prices and what's going on. Everyone should as well. So I think now is a good time to take a look at that demo from Mustard Insights on price whiz.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning to everyone once again. It's been a very, very exciting and insightful session. I'm just going to take 10 minutes of your time to talk a bit about what Mustard Insights is about, and afterwards I'll share the demo for price whiz. Now, Mustard Insights pretty much is centered around the idea of being able to maximize value from Africa's data. Personally, I have a background.
Loretta, I'm sorry. I introduced you earlier. I think you should introduce yourself again. You're the brains behind this operation, so please reintroduce yourself.
Right, sorry about that. So my name is Loretta Engr, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mustard Insights. I think that is the shortest introduction I can possibly give. Right, so Mustard Insights, I was talking about how my background is in private equity, and I know that throughout that period, data was always a concern. You want to invest in projects, and you probably find data back in as much as maybe 10 years back, and you're trying to make solid decisions from such information. And I also used to joke about how when we're looking for this information, so for example, you want to do a project in the real estate space, and then you go online and you find a report prepared by some Chinese company that probably came to Nigeria, lodged in Transcorp for like a month, and then they have this report that you now have to pay for. Now the report is probably dating back 15 years and doesn't have enough, but that's, that's what you get. So Mustard Insight was born out of the idea that Africa needs to own its narrative, and by owning its narrative, or to own its narrative, it needs to be able to create value and extract value out of its data. So our objective is to create a platform that aggregates data for governments who want to be able to make data-led policies, for social organizations who want to be able to effectively carry out need analysis, for companies who want to make decisions, for investors, like the example I gave, who want to be able to assess investment opportunities, and for the general public in terms of just data literacy. For those of you that follow us on social media already, I'm sure you see a lot of our charts. In the meantime, while we are still carrying out research, building our database, we visualize a lot of third-party data. Now, we believe that Africa's data challenge covers or is hinged on three main areas. First, it's availability. It's not available. We just can't find it. And most times you make assumptions. And for an economy like ours that we expect to be the next big thing, having the available data to be able to make effective decisions is paramount. And on the other hand, there's also the challenge of reliability, where there are times you do find data, and my research team has this challenge a lot of times, where you're looking for some information and you see 5 different sources with 5 different results. So reliability is a very central problem. And then the final thing is accessibility, in which case where there are times that somebody may have carried out this research, but it's not just accessible. So next slide. So our solution essentially, so like I said, if you follow on social media, what you see are just, you just see charts across the industries we cover, but ultimately what the Mustard Insight is here for is to build a data as a service platform. Internally, we imagine it like Google, but for African data. It's going to be a platform. I mean, this is just a snippet of the platform, but once it is live, I'm sure everyone on this call would get, you'd be notified. I'm sure you see it around. So it's just a platform where you can have access to Africa's data across multiple industries. Our goal is to be Africa's largest data aggregator. And of course, we expect that that's going to take a while. But I mean, one step at a time, our objective is to ensure that we provide the data and data infrastructure that is required for Africa to obtain the kind of investment opportunities that it needs to move to the next level. Additionally, we provide other services like research, business intelligence. We do data collection as well, database management, and we also provide personalized publications and insights. So yeah, that's just a rough summary of Mustard Insights. Now, beyond our data platform, it's our objective to create various data products. And one of the first products we're launching is PriceWiz. Now, we've spoken so much about fuel subsidy. I'm Nigerian, so I've experienced it true and true. We've seen situations where I've personally been, just in the space of maybe 3 hours. I was going from Aja in Lagos. I was coming to my house around Lekki, and I was trying to buy fuel at 600 Naira, and I was going to pay for that because I was like, if it's 600 Naira in Aja, then by the time I get to Lekki, it's probably selling at 1,000. And I couldn't buy for some reason, but as I moved forward, I saw 600, I saw 590, I saw 480, I saw 488. Eventually I bought at probably 490, just close to my house. And we were talking about, we've been talking about the possibility of where we are getting to, which is a free market economy for fuel subsidy and for other petroleum products. And we believe that you cannot have perfect competition without perfect information. And we've seen situations where even before subsidy was removed, where some of these stations hoard petrol when, it looks like some scarcity is coming, and so they hoard and then they sell to the highest bidder and things like that. So we want to be able to provide that kind of information to people. Now, PriceWiz is not just a price, it's not just for fuel. PriceWiz essentially is a price tracking and comparison tool. So our objective is for you to be able to track prices and compare them across a range of commodities, from petroleum commodities to agricultural commodities to retail commodities. However, our MVP, which is live, I would say it's live, it's still in testing, And I think before the end of this call, we'll share details for anyone who would like to try out the app. But the objective is for you to be able to compare prices and be able to make effective decisions from them. Now, with Price Wiz, is beyond just comparing prices. We provide additional insights like traffic data, how much did you buy out? Was there traffic? How long did it take? And just general customer reviews. And we intend to do this across all of the commodities we cover. But like I said, Price Wiz is starting from the petroleum industry. And I think there's one more slide after this, then we can watch the video. And I'll also be available to take questions towards the end of the session. So yeah, I mean, I've said most of it. I think we can just go ahead and watch the video of what the app looks like now. Yeah. Okay, so the audio is not on, so I'm just going to go ahead and run through the app. Could we just have this from the top again? Okay, so like I said, the app it has been built. This is just an interface of what it looks like, where you can, could you pause for a bit? Where you can, by putting in your location, you'll be able to see the price of petrol closest to you. You can filter by location, or you can also filter by price. You can also switch between stations to see either a map view or just see the ones around you. Now, the way it works is right now it is backed by a network of agents. We've currently covered, I think, about 1,500 stations in Lagos and Abuja. We've done the first round of data collection and we intend to update it. However, it's coming out as a free app. So for us to be able to manage the cost, we're putting it in the hands of the consumers to be able to help others. So the way it works is, I say I want to, maybe I go to Ikeja, for example, and I want to buy petrol. I bring out my phone, I put in my location, and then it shows me this is the price closest to you. Now, by the time I pick the one which is obviously the cheapest one, right? So I drive there and then I realize that, okay, it is selling at the exact price. I can agree with the price. And then afterwards, I can also rate this, my experience at the station. I can say whether there was traffic or whether the queue was short. And by providing that information, you are helping other people who are using the app. If for any reason I get there and the price may have changed, you can also update it to say, okay, the price has now changed, and other people will be able to make effective decisions from it. So yeah, that's pretty much a summary, but I'll be willing to take questions towards the end of the session. Thank you very much.
Great stuff. That's really, really good. But Loretta, I want to ask a question immediately instead of waiting to the end of the session. Is it going to be just for fuel? I made the example of me buying cooking gas earlier, and I found out it was 12,000 only when I had arrived and I was about to buy the cooking gas. So will you be expanding this to other commodities, rice, yam, or is it just going to be on fuel for now? What's the plan?
Yes, the plan is definitely to extend to other commodities. In the petroleum space, we intend to cover, so we started with petrol, we intend to cover diesel, we intend to get into gas. And by the time we get into the agricultural space, we'll also take it commodity by commodity, covering different areas so you can easily compare prices from location to location. Yeah.
Are you leveraging on Google Maps, the power? Did you build that yourselves as far as the maps and judging the distance of fuel stations and so on?
Yes, definitely. We have Google Maps APIs as well. Yeah.
Sweet. It's always great talking technology. All right. Loretta, thank you so much for that. Loretta, but again, the brains behind this operation, behind Mustard Insights, and that's like cool price whiz app, which I'm definitely going to be leveraging on moving forward. Let me get to our comments now and questions. And we're almost at the end of the webinar. We only got 5 minutes, but there've been a lot of the questions I'm seeing have been touched on by every single one of the panelists, but I don't think I got everybody's thoughts on the refineries. Adeyinka Abiru says, how do we handle our refineries to start adding value to product efficiency? And I will throw this in here, that the Taiwo Oyedele, who heads the Presidential Commission on Taxes, he was at the platform, the normal annual Independence Day talk, and he said the refineries should be sold off. I did want to quickly get the thoughts on the panel on Nigeria's refineries. Do we just, if the four of them is 455,000 barrels, you've got Dangote's refinery coming up, that's 600 and something plus thousand. There's a number of modular refineries. Do we sell off the refineries? Who's going to buy them, or do we rehabilitate them? Who was the last speaker before we went to our, I think it was Ronke. So I want to start with Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan. Mr. Akpan, what's your thoughts on our refineries?
Hello, Rotus. Okay, so concerning our refineries, I am of the opinion that we should actually see how we can revive those refineries, because it's going to be capital intensive rather for Nigeria at this particular state in time to actually think about coming up with new modern refineries. Rather, what we can do is that with the resources available, we can actually see how we can work on the already existing ones and see how we can put them up in shape to function properly.
Thank you so much for that. Let me swing back to Tolu Awoyinfa. Tolu, where are you on the refineries? Do we sell them off? Mr. Akpan says, try and revitalize them. Some money has already been spent. I think they said, which one? It was supposed to be Port Harcourt refinery, 60,000, capacity of 60,000 barrels was supposed to be December last year. Now they've moved it to December or this year or so or something. Where are you, Tolu, on the refineries? Okay, maybe Dr. Awoyinfa isn't on board yet with us. Let me hopefully she hops back on. Ronke, please, your thoughts on the refineries.
Definitely sell the refineries. I use Indorama as a fantastic example. It used to be called LMA Petrochemical Industries. It was run by the government, owned by the government for several years. It was a cost-eating establishment, always getting a budget, never made a profit. We sold it to a company called, Nigeria sold it to a company called Indorama. Within the first couple of years, they started to turn a profit. They didn't change the staff, they didn't move it out of Nigeria. Government started getting dividends, River State started getting dividends, other Niger Delta states that took shares in it started getting dividends. A few years after that, they doubled the capacity of Indorama, the former LMA Petrochemical. Government cannot run anything. They never make a profit. It never moves forward. We've had at least 10 or 15 turnaround maintenances since I've been in the oil industry. None of them have worked. We need to get rid of it, put it in the hands of entrepreneurs who will follow the money, make sure it makes a profit, and make Nigeria a refiner back again.
Thank you so much for that. Okay, Loretta, I have a question for you now on the refineries. This is on the app now. This is from Titilayo. And Titilayo is asking, are you looking at Lagos and Abuja only for Price Whiz app for petroleum products? And how soon are you extending this to other, okay, she asked other commodities. I already asked you that question. But so yeah, are you starting with just Lagos, Abuja? Or are you going to spread that out?
Yeah, we're definitely going to spread that out. We're starting with Lagos and Abuja because we expect that's where would have, I mean, for obvious reasons anyway. But we do intend to cover as many states as possible. During the exercise, we realized that there were a lot more filling stations that we imagined, for every city. So moving from city to city to ensure that we cover as much as we can, to ensure that wherever you are, you can easily find the closest station near you. That's our objective, yeah.
Great stuff. Ronke, what do you think of this app and this need for data and what they're doing with this Price Whiz app? What do you make of it?
I think it's a very good thing. There's always need for transparency and accountability. And once the information is out there and people know, it's going to stop pockets of control and manipulation. So I think it's a fantastic idea. My view is that everybody who is on here at this time, who knows anybody who sells gas or has a filling station, get them to sign on. Let us be proactive in ensuring that their app is populated with details and information, and we will all benefit from it.
Thank you for that. Mr. Akpan, what do you think of the app and what do you think of the data drive? Yeah, Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, you're on mute.
Okay. So sorry, Rotus, I didn't get the question.
Yeah, it was on this price whiz on what they're doing, trying to aggregate, get more knowledge forward for price discovery for commodities. What do you think of the app, and I guess what it means, for us moving forward?
Okay, I think price whiz is actually a very great idea. I believe it's gonna be a very serious game changer in terms of information dissemination to not just the customers but the marketers involved. I remember you mentioned a question came about it coming across for other commodities and not just for petroleum products. So I believe it's going to actually impact the way consumers actually react to price. They're going to be well informed and they will make much better decisions considering the situation of the market whenever they want to make use of the application. So it's a very good add-on to everything.
Okay, thank you for that. Loretta, still more questions. This is on the private and public sector side. Adiola asked for the price with, Bright Mohammed. Are you open to collaborations to expand to other areas or states? And then Abubakar Ibrahim says on the PriceWiz app, is there an opportunity to collaborate with the government and integrate real-time tracking on pumps at filling stations? So are you, Loretta, what's your outlook for collaborations on government, private sector, and other folks?
Yes, definitely. We're already in the process of securing collaborations, strategic partnerships. And the reason we started with agents is to expedite the process, so we don't have to wait for sign-ups and things like that. So it's easier to just have agents that are constantly visiting the stations and updating the app. But over time, we do intend to partner with strategic people who can take us, or organizations that can take us to the next level. The second question, I think I missed the second question.
Well, it was on the same along the same lines, both on collaborations. So I guess one was asking whether you collaborate with the governments, at least I guess maybe for the NNPC stations, and then the other was on the private side. Okay. So you've touched on that. All right. We're a little over time. I do want to give Ronke and Mr. Iyene Akpan, and also Loretta will give us closing remarks. But I guess Ronke, in 30 seconds, maybe a minute, Nigeria. What's your outlook on Nigeria's energy future?
Nigeria has a very bright energy future, but I need to see that more Nigerians take ownership of the industry. Nigerians don't know enough about it, they don't research enough, and they don't lend their voices to things. So please, this is our heritage, this is our shared ownership. Nigeria belongs to us, and the oil in the ground belongs to us. So we need to put our voices out there to ensure that the government, through advocacy, through whatever means we have, hear our voice and know what we want. We're not saying they're going to do exactly what we want, but please let's lend our voices to the things that are happening in this nation because they concern us and the generations that are coming behind us.
Thank you so much for that. Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, your closing thoughts on your outlook for the energy sector for Nigeria.
Okay, I think the energy sector for Nigeria still has a very long way to go. It's actually a sector that I see great potential in, provided we have the right policies and the right mindset, the right set of people to actually drive the industry. And we need more Nigerians to actually think about the industry and actually put hands together and see how we can move this industry forward.
Thank you so much. Okay, Loretta, you get closing remarks, but Adedipo is saying, how do you download the PriceWiz app? Because you can't find it on the App Store yet. So is it available yet to download? And I guess you can now roll into your closing remarks, Loretta.
Yes, so we're currently testing, so it's available to download, but we're doing it within a closed space. So if you'd like to try out the app, please just send in your email address and it will be sent across to you to download. But in a few weeks, it will be made public and I'm sure we'll all see the announcement. now to closing remarks. I mean, I couldn't have imagined this any better. The insights shared here, I don't think I've heard them or seen them anywhere in recent times. So I'm really excited about what we've been able to come up with and how we've been able to pull it up. So special thanks first to the keynote speaker, then to our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for taking time out to do this. Your insights have been very valuable, and I'm really hoping that from discussions and conversations like this, we'll be able to, actually make a difference, have impacts in this space. So thank you so much. And also to the attendees, thank you for joining in and lending us 2 hours of your time today. Thank you.
Great stuff. And people are putting in their email. I've seen lots of email addresses here. Everybody wants to try out the app. So I guess you can hop into you folks at Mustard can hop into the comment section there and take a look at all those emails. I'll also throw my own in there because I do want to try out the app. Panelists, Ronke, Mr. Eti-Iyene Akpan, thank you so much. Of course, everybody else that participated, Loretta and the good folks at Mustard, thank you guys for putting this together. I'm honored to have been a part of this. I've learned a lot. Great discussion. Rotus Odiri here, Global Business Report on Arise TV. Thank you all, and we'll hope to be back again for another great panel from Mustard, because we need data. Data is very much important for Nigeria. So you all take care and do enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.